Ba-ba-ba-ba, ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. We are live. Happy Friday, everyone. Good morning. Good morning from Victoria, British Columbia, Pacific Standard Time Zone, arguably the greatest time zone ever created. I've heard that argument made a number of times here in my house by me, loudly. And you don't have to subscribe to it. It's okay. I'm going to say a lot of stuff on this show that you may not agree with. And so, what this is doing is I'm setting expectations for you. I'm saying some things right out of the gate. I'm anchoring. This is a negotiation technique. I'm anchoring you so that I'm starting ridiculous. And then, as I say stuff that's less ridiculous, you're going to be more inclined to agree with me. It's a very subtle technique, but I am telling you about it. So, it may backfire. Anyhow. Happy Friday. This is a busy one for me. I've got a lot of stuff on the go this Friday, culminating, and I don't want to make you feel bad about your crappy high day Friday plans, but today is busy, and then it's culminating in pickleball and then Magic the Gathering. So just so you know that things are not all fun and games here at the Transformational Leader. We get up to some pretty important stuff. Let's get up to the first most important thing of the Friday morning. That's the hot brown. Get some of this hot brown in ya. Special thanks to friend of the show, David Brunsden, for hot brown as a fun way to describe coffee. And you could probably use that to describe tea and then some other stuff too that we're not going to do. If you would like to be immortalized and memorialized on this show, feel free to send in your catchphrases for coffee, fun words and names and things. You can put them out there. We will join you in them. We will bring you to the forefront. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today and a short time to do it. So I'm probably going to dive in pretty quick. And you're going to be shocked to know that part of what I'm going to talk about today is leadership. And part of what I'm going to talk about is AI. Isn't that weird? The two things. The first thing is what I only ever really am interested in talking about. And the second thing is what everyone is currently talking about today. I am using AI fairly regularly right now in my practice. There's an interesting tension I feel in my system, which is I recognize the fact that AI is costly in the sense that it demands a lot of processing power. It requires data centers being spun up. It's not friendly to our environment, and so on and so forth. So on the one hand, I'm alive to that. I'm alive to the fact that it's not free, and we all know that because you probably have a subscription, but also that it's not like just like buying a $10 t-shirt. You could say, well, it costs $10, but there's an externality that's not getting paid, which is that, someone's making that t-shirt at a fraction of the cost and getting paid nothing, or it's causing pollutants to be put into a river somewhere in some country that you don't have to think about, that sort of stuff. AI has many externalities that we're probably not alive to as we use it. So on the one hand, that's the first part of the tension for me. And on the other hand, I'm alive to the fact that I don't believe that simply refusing to use it on principle is the answer. Now, you don't have to subscribe to that, but that's my belief. My belief is that doing so, if I could just say it's bad for the environment, therefore I'm not going to touch it. The trouble with that is that it's here and it's being used and it's revolutionary. It'd be like saying the internet's bad for the environment, so I'm not going to use it. That's fine, but the internet is here and this is going to shape how life is going to look in the generations to come. And AI is no different than the internet. It's as revolutionary. And so I feel that it's really important, and in fact, almost that there's a duty me in terms of two things. The first is that I be willing to hold that tension alive in me so that I'm going to flip the order of them. The first is that I'd be willing to use them, that I embrace these tools and this technology that's here so that I can learn about the shortcomings. I can learn about its benefits. I can learn about the boundaries around this thing. Because if you listen to some people, you'll hear that this is the be all and everything. It's going to solve every single problem you could possibly have. Everything is obsolete. You'll never want for anything again. And we can feel on some level the salience with which that person feels that. And we can also feel that doesn't feel quite right. That's a bit spoken like a panacea. like a medicine that'll cure everything. But we may not be able to distinguish for ourselves where the boundaries actually are. And so to me, it's really important that I be a user of this so that I can understand it. One way you could think of this is like, in order to heal something, we have to be able to come into contact with it. You can't, it's sort of like if someone is trying to, this is a big example I'm going to throw at you, but imagine someone trying to heal the problem of the opioid crisis, the addiction problem. They're trying to heal that collective wound in us, but they are unable to accept that they have any part of themselves that's anything at all like what these addicts have going on for them. So there's no empathy. There's no ability for them to come into contact internally with the experience that they're trying to solve over there. They are not going to be able to make an impact on it. We actually have to let ourselves feel the thing. So the first obligation, duty I feel I have is to actually use this so that I can learn, so I can learn from within. And the second obligation / duty that I feel I have is to stay alive to that tension, to let that exist without collapsing it. And the way I can collapse it is I can just turn off my brain and my heart and be like, whatever, it doesn't matter. You know what? That problem will solve itself, and kind of dismiss that feeling of like, but this is costly. Instead, it's important that I hold it in my heart, and that I let that voice continue to stay there, and that I hold the somewhat icky feeling that happens every time I use this and think like, geez, is this really should I really be having AI regenerate an answer to this dumb question about Boston Terriers farting? Or could I look that up on the internet? And so I don't want to collapse that tension. And so that's how this exists for me. For some of you, it'll exist differently, and that's totally fine. Some of you will simply not want to touch it. Some of you will want to touch it and just say, screw it, it'll solve itself. And that's your choice too. But that's how this exists for me. That's how I resolve that current tension, which is basically by not resolving it, but by acknowledging there's something for me to take action towards, and that it's important to keep that tension open and alive within me rather than collapsing it. Okay, hot brown pause. Let's have a hot brown pause, people. That's an HBP. HHBP to you. That's a happy hot brown pause to you, my friends. Whoever this one viewer is over here listening. HHBP, my friend. Double HBP. Hashtag HTHHBP. I could put that on a t-shirt and make billions. But I won't, because I want to toil here in solitude with y'all. I'm having fun. Okay. What I just mentioned kind of transitions first into a odd conversation that came out of breakfast today with my friend Leif Baradoy, another friend of the show. Leif and I were talking about, I was sharing how I was revisiting, for whatever reason, I've been very reflective lately because I've been turning off podcasts, I'm turning off all the incoming consumption in my life, meaning TV, podcasts, video game, all of that stuff that comes in. I turned that off because I really want to create a deeper listening in myself of myself, and I want to generate more. And it's hard for your system to generate when it's doing so much consumption. If you really want to become better at generating, you got to turn the consumption down, or at least I have. So I'm sitting and generating, and that means that, sometimes I'm driving and my thoughts take me wherever they take me. And I was just reflecting on who I had become or how I showed up in my earlier relationships. And I was noticing shame about that. And we were just talking about this, and I was sharing, like being with that experience, it requires a lot of compassion, because I don't like how I showed up with the people that I dated earlier in my life. When I look back, I'm like, wow, that was really cold, closed-hearted, arrogant, mean, nasty, uncaring, unkind. I could keep labeling or ladling out. I think that's what I was trying to combine there. I could keep ladling out adjectives to describe how I showed up. But the core of it is, when I look back at who I was, I feel shameful. I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And the practice I'm in with that shame is to stay open to it and not close it. And that's hard work. It's hard to stay with my shame and then slowly have compassion for how I showed up and forgiveness for how I showed up at that time. Because what I want to do is I want to collapse the tension that shame creates inside of me. And so this is kind of like where this leads is that shame and guilt in particular, they're two emotional states that are they're really potent gateways. They reveal something to us. When we feel shame or guilt around something, that's usually an indication, a really strong indication that there's some type of healing available to us. And I like to think that those experiences of shame and guilt are the gateway through which we must pass to get to the healing, to create the healing inside of us. So if you really want to heal something, you are probably going to experience some form of shame or guilt. That's almost certainly going to be part of your process. The desire, and I see this all the time when people practice with plant medicine or other stuff, is like, I'm going to have a crazy, wild experience, and then I'm going to be healed. Or I'm going to go, and if we just talk about the thing enough, the experience is going to resolve itself. I have yet to find that to be the case in my life or in the lives of the people that I support. Almost certainly, we have to go through that shame and the guilt. And there's kind of two demons, I like to think, that stand at that gateway. And those two demons they do two different approaches to keep us from the healing. The healing it's not really demonic in the sense that there's something out there orchestrating against your healing. It's more that your system is designed like an oyster, which is to say that what an oyster does is when the piece of grit gets into its system, it's an irritant, and it builds a pearl around it, and it closes that irritant off from the rest of the oyster system. So the oyster can boom, I built a pearl. Now this thing is unable to affect me. I got to walk around life with this big lump inside of me, but I'm safe from it. That's what we do as humans. And the pearl is shame. Shame keeps us from going into the heart of that thing. It keeps it blocked off. So does guilt. So the way these two sort of metaphoric demons work to keep us from actually breaking down that pearl and creating the healing in our lives is one demon, its job is to have you avoid feeling shame or guilt. And so this is a really common kind of trope for people who it's all rainbows. There's nothing to be bad or feel bad about, or I just don't feel any shame in my life. Well, that's friggin' weird. And you're probably avoiding something if you don't feel any shame in your life, because shame is a fundamental, basic human emotional state. It's like a default state. We can all talk about this because it's part of the human condition. So if you are just not feeling shame, same as like if you just don't get angry, well, then you're denying some part of your experience. You've got your thumb on the scale of what it is to be a human, because no baby comes out of the womb and just doesn't happen to feel anger. Every single person who's raised a child is like, yeah, that kid's gotten angry, but probably the child at some point got trained out of it. So the first demon's job is it stops you from walking through the gate by getting you to avoid the feeling of shame at all. And what that does is it means that you never even come into contact with this gate. As soon as you start to come close, the demon subtly guides you away and down a different path, which then allows you to not have to feel that shame. So in my example, it would be like I start to think about how it went with those women that I dated when I was younger. And then I just sort of like shortcut my process and be like, yeah, but I was young and I didn't know any better. So, whatever, it's no big deal. And then I can immediately set aside revisiting that moment. I don't actually visit it. I kind of use a thought terminating cliche to stop my process of going deeper towards it. And instead just, all right, what are we going to look at next? So what this does is it keeps us in orbit around the thing, but without ever coming into contact with it. It doesn't resolve itself, just like a pearl in an oyster, right? The oyster doesn't eliminate the grit. It contains it, but then it must become a part of it. That's what the first demon does. Hot brown moment. Guys, quick feedback moment. If you're listening and you are enjoying this hot brown moment, let me know. Put a comment in there. Be like, I'm here for the HBs. The second demon, their job is to have you stop and spend all your time at the gate, but never walking through it. So this is the version where you're willing to feel the shame, but then you get stuck in just feeling the shame instead of walking through that gate and letting yourself feel the shame, but then finding your way to compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, grace, you instead just sit in the, oh, I suck so much. Oh, I'm such a piece of crap. Oh, and then hang out there. And so that's also a very effective way to kind of, both of these paths make it look like we're doing the work or like we're healing on some level, but it locks us. We get stuck at that gate and we can't move beyond it. So those are two ways that we get blocked from creating whatever there is to create next, as we either avoid the feeling we don't want to feel, or we get stuck in the feeling that we don't want to feel, and then we just hang out there, sort of like poking at a wound with our finger to make sure that we remember how it hurts. Okay, that's it for healing chat. We're going to get into the leadership problem under every leadership problem now. So, whoops, knock that mug there. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different topics. Which one do I want to start with? I think I want to start with what AI is revealing about leadership. Excuse me. So AI, if you haven't used AI, you're probably one of the few people that listen to this show that haven't. The thing I'm going to invite you to do is go to ChatGPT, turn it on, and ask it this question. Ask it, how do I use you? And then just be in a dialogue with it for a half hour. And by the end of it, you'll probably be like, whoa, that's wild. That went much better than if I asked Google, how do I use you? So that's one way you can start to like develop some facility, understand this a little bit. But I'm going to assume that everyone watching, listening has some understanding, some experience with AI. So what AI is doing right now is it's eating, it's consuming, it's removing everything that leaders prior to this point have been valued for. Strategy, analysis, optimization, execution, all of that stuff that was a leader's stock and trade, that is being flattened. So what I mean by being flattened is historically, the leader that was the best at optimizing, the leader that was the best at executing, there was a big gap between that leader and the leader who was, the 90% in the 90th percentile versus the one in the 100th percentile. And that gap created arbitrage. That gap created a distinctive difference between what the one leader who was at the top and the leader that was at the top 90% could create. And so that became how leaders, advanced, got regarded, became well known or appreciated or got accolades, so on and so forth. AI is removing that. It's flattening that. That gap is closing. Oh, you're not naturally particularly good at optimization? No problem. Just put that into AI. Ask it, hey, here's my situation. How do I optimize for this? It will provide that answer. And you will be astounded by how good that answer is. I'm going to take a quick digression here, because often one of the hooks that people hang their argument on here, in law we'd call this you need a hook to hang your argument on, to hang your hat on. The hook people say is, yeah, but Adam, the answers sometimes are wrong and people aren't even aware of that. Yes, that's true, but it's also, that is already yesterday's problem. Like, I'm not going to say that AI is currently flawless, but if you have been using it for like the last 6 months, you probably are already well aware it's getting better and better at an exponential rate. And it's learning, and we are learning how to create systems that have a redundancy so that here's the answer. Great. Now I'm going to have you run this just behind the scenes against this AI that's going to fact check against what you just gave. Okay, great. So relying on the idea that no, those answers actually are sometimes wrong and that's the real problem. It is an issue, but that's not actually the real fundamental thing that AI is eating about leadership. That's getting solved. The thing that's at issue is that everything that we've described so far in this leadership layer is being flattened. And so what is left, once you flatten that all out, is the one thing that cannot be replicated, that AI can't do, which is the quality of presence that a leader can bring and that allows them to change what's possible in the room. And so that quality of presence, for example, includes things like the ability to sit in the tension of a space where someone is asking a bunch of questions and you are alive to the thing that they are asking questions over top of. So they keep asking all these questions, but there's actually like a thing that they're surfacing, that they're orbiting around, but not actually touching. Have you ever had this experience with someone? You might not have been able to distinguish it, but you noticed, you were like, wow, I'm out for lunch with this person. They're asking me a bunch of interesting questions. I'm answering those questions. It feels like there's a lot of dialogue happening. It feels like our conversation is moving in a particular direction, and yet something feels missing. Have you ever had that experience? That's what I'm talking about. And that's the kind of thing. Currently what happens is that leaders and AI, whatever, will get asked these questions and then we'll provide the answers. And you can spend an hour doing that over lunch or in the meeting or whatever. And then you finish and it's like, it finished, but like it felt like there was some traction kind of missing there. The quality of presence I'm describing is the sort of leader that can sit in that experience of something feels missing here. And rather than step over that, rather than avoid the discomfort that that causes and just continue to engage in the interesting interview format, back and forth, answering questions, asking questions kind of thing, instead be the kind of leader that can say, hey, I'm happy to keep answering your questions, but it feels like there's something that we're stepping over here. What is that? That creates discomfort. Because what happens in that moment is the leader and the presence they're bringing has disrupted the pattern. It's broken up the comfort that comes from this unconscious pattern of like, I ask questions about you, I show interest in you, you respond to them and feel good about the fact that I'm asking about you. You don't ever have to learn about me. I don't have to offer anything. I don't, et cetera, et cetera. There we go. And so this ability to sit in the discomfort, to sit in the tension, that's what is now really going to become more and more and more in demand from leaders. And so this moment we're in is a moment where what I call ontological leadership, leaders who have developed or are developing an ability to be and to sit in a particular experience without needing to collapse the tension it causes, are becoming more and more differentiated. Up until this point, that gap between efficiency, optimization, all of that stuff, that was just, it was more relevant and it's easier to create that than the sort of thing that I'm talking about. You can gain more optimization, you can learn your process more without really having to sit in much discomfort. So what's happening is not that this ontological leadership, these sort of leaders who can bring a particular quality, a particular presence into the space, it's not that this is the moment for that kind of leadership despite AI. It's the moment for this kind of leadership because of AI. AI is flattening that gap. And what that leaves now is a space in which those that can actually break up the pattern of asking questions and getting better and better answers and reveal what is underneath that pattern. I recorded an episode of the podcast on this the other day, and I promised I was going to talk about how AI was actually going to worsen leadership down this lens. And I forgot to do it. So I'm going to share a little bit about this right now. What is happening is that AI provides a very compelling, well, let's go to that example I had. I'm at lunch, someone's asking me these questions. They're very interested in me. The questions make me feel like I'm important. I get to share about myself and we're talking. If you've ever had this experience, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're getting asked the questions. There's a flow to the conversation. It's all fine and good, but something feels missing. And what's missing is the presence, the connection, the contact with the person on the other side of the table asking you the questions. They're not in the space. What's in the space is you and their questions about you. So there's like maybe a little bit, from what they're interested in, but there's none of them in the space. AI is like this device that is better and better at answering the questions that person is asking. So if you imagine instead of being at lunch with me, this person is at lunch with an AI, the AI is going to give them even more fuller answers to the questions they're asking, blah, 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 blah. And that pattern can continue forever. But what AI won't do is it won't stop and say, okay, what I'm feeling is a lack of you in the space right now. Like over here, there's just this, I feel I'm happy to talk about myself, but I'm actually interested in you. And I notice we're stepping over that. And further, AI can't create the vulnerability that happens on the other side of the table when the person feels seen in that moment by you putting that forward. So what AI does is it supports that overtop pattern of continuing. And it doesn't get underneath the layer of the identity that has the need for that pattern to exist in the first place. So you never actually get underneath and break up the very thing that has that pattern happening. And as a result, the irony is that in a lot of ways, AI actually serves to reinforce that pattern because the questions keep getting answered better and better and better. So it seems it like reinforces the dynamic. It's like, yeah, you keep asking these questions, I'm going to keep giving you these answers, and off we go. So if any of you have found this kind of experience where you're using AI, you're asking these questions, you're getting those answers, and yet it doesn't seem to be moving the needle. For many people, this might be too far along the path yet, but for any power users, you might be noticing that there's a lot you can do with it. And there's a point at which it seems to not quite, there's a threshold that's not crossing. This threshold is what I'm describing. You can't get to a shift in your underlying structure or identity or ontology by asking questions that arise out of that ontology. The part of me that is asking those questions and then getting answers to those questions, that we can't penetrate below that surface. The questions are actually in the way. Okay, that felt clumsy as heck as I was explaining it, but that's my take right now. That's what I'm going to leave you with for that one. Okay, I want to talk about the difference between a leader who grows and a leader who develops. So in this distinction, growth is ultimately about more capacity inside the existing structure. When I talk about existing structure, I'm talking about everything that exists internal to me that includes stuff like my beliefs about what it is to be professional, my beliefs about what is an appropriate conversation, my beliefs about how people perceive me and what people actually want me to bring, my beliefs about what you in particular as an individual need and what broader people need, my beliefs about what a leader should do, my beliefs about what a leader shouldn't do, all of that sort of stuff. That's what I mean when I say structure. It's the way you have made sense of the world. It's the coherent, completely fully assembled set of rules that you bring into the space of whatever you're trying to lead or anything along those lines. So growth is growing more capacity, like being able to do more from all of that stuff being unchanged. And development is letting go of this growth on top of that structure and instead doing the work to dismantle or rearrange or change or shift that underlying structure. This distinction sounds kind of neat, but it's actually probably the most fundamental, most important part about leadership, and it's part of what is most lacking in leadership development. Because most high performers are extraordinarily good at growing. High performers are people that most of us, by the time we reach probably mid to late 20s, we have done our development. We have established our set of rules, and those rules have fallen away from our consciousness as like a set of beliefs that we're hypothesizing, testing out, et cetera, et cetera. It exists as the way the world is and the way I am. And then on top of it, you can add layers of this, right? There's the way the world is and there's the way I am. And then there's a part of the world called leadership. Okay, this is the way leadership is. And leadership is going to be consistent with the way the world is. It's going to be a subset. You can keep building this out. Then there's the way that leadership is here at this corporate office that I'm at, and so on and so forth. So high performers tend to be the people that are just like every single one of us, have established that structure, have had it fade into their subconscious. It's not something they're really aware of. Hey, Doug, nice to see you, man. I'm going to come to what Doug wrote in just a sec. I'll finish this point first. They reach a point where they've built a structure and then they're able to optimize the results they create from that structure. So if I was like, check it out. I'm going to raise a bunch of kids and I'm going to teach all of those kids you are going to play baseball, but here's the thing. In baseball, it's rude to use two hands to swing a bat. It's actually very offensive to do that. And no one would ever do that. And you're ridiculous if you do that. It's totally inappropriate. And I ingrained this belief in these kids' heads. And that happens and it happens and it happens. And initially it's very explicit how I do that. But over the years, as I'm gaslighting these little children for my own glee and pleasure, they slowly internalize this belief, and they go and they play baseball with someone else and they see him using two hands. They're like, what a dick. And they make fun of him. And then that person starts to either stop playing with them or work themselves out to fit in. And then they too start doing it with single-handed. So high performers are the ones who, inside this structure, the structure is baseball is the game we play. We love baseball, and it's rude and inappropriate and unsporting and all of that stuff to swing a bat with any more than one hand. High performers are the ones that optimize inside that structure. That's their growth. So they are better at figuring out, okay, got it. These are the rules of the game, until they stop seeing them as the rules of the game and are just like, this is how it's done. How do I best achieve given this is how it's done? And then this is how it's done fades below their consciousness. And so it just becomes, how do I do baseball best? And so those people create better results inside that existing structure than most other people. Amazing. So that's what high performers are really extraordinarily good at doing, better than most people. This presents a problem in leadership. The first part of the problem is that, well, it's not really a problem. It's that high performers create better results than other people given the same underlying structure. And as a result, they get promoted up. As time goes on, they get promoted up into leadership. The trouble is that because they have been so good at growing inside their existing structure, and because they don't see, none of us see our existing structure. You cannot rise up out of the water you swim in and be like, oh, that's the current I'm in. It requires someone else. It requires someone like me. It requires a coach. It requires a container that can hold you and have you look at this. So you can't see it yourself. And so what happens is these high performers have gotten so good at swinging with one hand. And then what the leadership moment is asking of them is, we need to create a result that can only be achieved by swinging with two hands. It's not voiced that way. It's just like, look, you got to hit a home run that far instead of this far. And the person is going to like really try to figure out how to achieve that goal using one-handed swings, because that's where they were better than anyone else. And because they got rewarded so well for being better than anyone else, it's especially hard for high performers to get underneath the surface of this and surrender the idea that what they've gotten so good at doing is now the very thing in their way. To actually create the new result that they're striving for, they have to surrender everything that worked for them up to this point. And then they have to rearrange the internal structure. And before they can do that, they have to see that no amount of attempts at growth is actually going to get them there. So if you're this sort of person, I just want to describe the experience you might be in so you can kind of situate yourself in it if that's true for you. You may be finding that you're super, super good at like creating results better than most. And you may find that it's gotten you really far, but you're probably having an experience that there's something that just perpetually seems just out of grasp. And that something may be like a particular kind of like a particular profit margin, a particular growth level, or it might be something like making the kind of results you want to make at your work, having the internal experience of peace and spaciousness and openness and freedom that you really crave. And those two things can't quite come together. So whatever that experience is, that's what it's like when you start to come up against the limits of the growth paradigm. At that point, usually what is being asked of us is a developmental shift. And the point that is necessary to reach to be able to cross that threshold from growth to developmental shifts is that you, one, can start to see that there's diminishing returns to the old strategy. Two, that you're alive to something that you want on the other side of that threshold that you can't seem to get to from this diminishing returns approach. And 3, you're alive to all that, and you are willing to be responsible for creating that, knowing that that responsibility is going to change you. What that means is that crossing that threshold, you're clear that it's going to ask something of you that you have not yet learned how to create or provide. And that's going to create a shift internally in you. You won't get to stay intact creating that result. And this is probably the most important distinction I want to make here, is that growth, which is to say what high performers are extraordinarily good at doing, growth allows us to achieve more of the same result without requiring any shift in our underlying structure. We get to stay the same fundamentally while trying to achieve more and more and more. And this is why it's so compelling, because it doesn't break up who we know ourselves to be or our stories about how we show up or anything along those lines. Development, transformation, developmental work, like the heart of what leadership that really changes the world, what that's about is taking on something that fundamentally changes you. And there is no safety down that path because you can't yet know what that end result will look like. So it requires a degree of trust that's really, really risky. Whereas growth does not. Growth, everything here gets to stay together, and everything you know from this side of that threshold, it's worked out or work outable. So we need more than ever leaders that can develop and be developed. All right, let's take a quick hot brown. Okay, I'm just going to read what you wrote here, Doug. And Doug wrote, the greatest trap I've seen with using AI in marketing is that it executes exactly what you ask, even if your underlying strategy is flawed. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about. I often see students and early career marketers get caught in an endless optimization loop, using AI to refine messaging for a target audience that is fundamentally incorrect. AI so far struggles to tell you if your starting premise is wrong. To achieve real results, we must treat AI as a powerful tactical multiplier, but rely on seasoned human experience. And then he's saying, also, I use AI in marketing more and more as I can't see a realistic path to achieve top results in my field when my competition has access to it. This is an interesting part about AI, is that everyone's going to use it. It's sort of like, for me, it reminds me of the early days when we got email. Yes, I'm that old. I don't care. Shut up. When email first came out, it was like, oh my God, it's so much faster. I don't have to pick up the phone. I don't have to have a conversation. We don't have to catch up, blah, 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 blah. I can just shoot this over there. They quickly respond and then they shoot me back. Done, handled. Holy cow. This is incredible. What a time saver. But then, of course, that became the norm and it stopped being a time saver and it just became how things are done. And AI is very similar. AI right now, especially for early adopters, there's like a period where it's going to provide you some early adoption advantage if you're someone, playing with this out on the forefront. But it's just a matter of time before this becomes the way that work happens. This becomes the speed of the work. I'll give you a very simple example. I've used Claude Code to create basically an executive assistant kind of AI to say, like, here's the stuff you need to manage. This is something on your list. And here's some quick emails that I could draft up for you if you want. And I'm like, yeah, draft me. I'm going to edit that. Okay, that doesn't sound enough like me. That's weird. That's, whatever. I've got to figure out how to keep my credential renewed. This website requires a bunch of processing. Look at it, figure it out. Boom. And it does that. And it comes back. And it's like, wow, that was 2 hours I devoted that I'd set aside to manage figuring out what I need to do for my credential, handled. And it even drafted the email for me to send to get a little more clarification. This is incredible. Totally is. 5 years from now, that's just going to be an expected part of how we work. And then the sense of freedom and like, oh my God, it's opened up all my time, that'll be gone. And you know what will actually be the determinant of whether or not you have more time? Your ontological capacity, the development that you are able to sustain within you that allows you to create an underlying experience of freedom and spaciousness, regardless of the demands on your time, rather than trying to move through those demands faster and faster, faster. The first thing I mentioned, that underlying experience, that's a developmental shift. Getting better at moving through the tasks on your plate, that's a growth-based shift. So, and like Doug said, people are just using them. And so it puts us into this position where the answer, I don't think, is just not to use it. It's to use it, but to stay cognizant of what it's costing us and what it's asking of us and what is shifting and what is not shifting. And the thing I think that Doug said that I really want to underline here is it executes exactly what we ask. It does not question the place from which that question arose. And this is the thing that we were talking about at the start, right? You'll get better and better answers to the questions you're asking, which kind of is in its own way a self-affirmation of asking the right question. If you ask me a question, I give you a really consistent, concise answer, it triggers something in your brain that's like, more knowledge, now I know. And that reaffirms the idea that the question you asked must have been the right one, because now you have this salient experience, or an experience of salience. And what that does is it actually kind of smooths over the cracks in the layer that would have you start to be like, hold on, but why am I asking these questions? Why am I trying to ask questions to figure out how to make a boss respect me more and more over and over? And why do I continue to like refine that further and further? Why does that persist? It's not something that AI is very good at bringing you to face. There's more I want to say there, but I'm gonna leave it at that. 10:45. Okay, how are we doing for time? I got a little bit of time. Okay, cool. We got some other topics we can touch on. Okay, so this one, why do people know what to do and still don't do it? What's up with this? People, you know what to do, why don't you do it? This is a really common experience for people in the consulting fields. Probably almost certainly is going to become a problem that is brought in-house as opposed to stays external. What I mean by that is historically, companies would be like, we got a management problem, or we've got an accounting problem, we need better systems. And they would hire someone who would come in, sit with them, look for inefficiencies, blah, 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 do that. And this would solve for any inefficiency. Hold on, let me find a way to word this succinctly. I'm going to fail, but I'm going to try anyhow. This approach would allow the company to solve for any inefficiency in which the solution to that existed inside their existing growth paradigm. Meaning, if their model for leadership was that the leader is always right, and your job, if you're below the leader, is just to nod your head and implement what they tell you to implement, then any inefficiency that can be solved from that kind of leadership structure, the outside consultant can help you achieve. They'll be like, this is what you need to do, blah, blah, blah. And then those are the results. You can do that. But any solution for which the way to resolve the inefficiency would require a fundamentally different paradigm of leadership, which is not a growth edge, that's a developmental edge, that will break down. And so what would happen in these situations is consultants would come, they would bring people, okay, here are your problems, here's the solutions, here's what you got to do about it. So now the company knows what there is to do. Awesome. It's clear what there is to do. We've got the answer in front of us. It didn't work. And consultants would often be like, when I've interviewed them or talked to them or even sought to collaborate with them, they'd say, the thing is, we bring something really good, but the company just can't seem to execute it. They just can't seem to do that. And we're not sure what the issue is, or they might be sure of what the issue is and not quite be on top of it. The issue is that it's not a knowledge problem. It occurs like a knowledge problem at first, because when you have a particular structure, either internally as an individual or internally as an organization, you are not going to conceive of solutions that don't fit within that existing structure. That's just not how it works. Like, if I have a story that women find me repellent, and I'm like, I really want to find someone that I love, then most of my solutions are going to be sort of unconsciously of the flavor, given women find me repellent, how do I overcome that and get them to fall in love with me? I'm not going to just pick up a solution or an approach that's like based in people think I'm really attractive and want to be with me. That's just not going to occur to me. That's not what is sort of allowed for inside my existing structure. So it occurs like a knowledge problem because those solutions in a company would be, like, hey, your staff actually need to be able to take swings and miss the mark and make risks and fail and be caught by their leaders. All of that is not available when the leadership structure says you do what your boss says you do and you implement it to the best of your ability. And that's what our leadership design looks like. When that's the way it is, those solutions aren't there. But what happens is the consultant brings these in and it occurs like, it really was a knowledge problem. See, we couldn't have thought of that ourselves. You brought us the solution. Thank you so much. But that is inaccurate. That's a mirage. It looks like a knowledge problem because you came to an answer that existed outside of what you would have conceived of internally in your organization, but it's not. And it's also not a discipline problem. This isn't something people need to willpower through. It's that the behavior that's happening that's causing these inefficiencies, that's causing things to fall away, serves some kind of function that you can't see from inside the system. What that means is the inefficient habit or pattern that you were trying to overcome, it's there for a reason. And that reason matters. It matters to the internal balance of the system. Like, think of it like the engine in a car. The engine in a car does not have a bunch of random shit in there that you can just remove. It's not like there's like your car engine and it's doing all this stuff and you're like, my car's stupid. Like, it's making a popping noise. The way we relate to transformation in organizations, our leadership and our lives is like we're looking at a car engine and there's a popping noise and we're like, it's the stupid Johnson rod. There's no reason to have that in my car. I'll just take that out. There's no reason for it. If you take something out of your car's engine, your car is not going to work very good. And the challenging thing for people to kind of surrender to, or at least come to an acceptance of, is everything happening in your system, all of it is essential currently to the current way your system runs. Every behavior is serving a function, and that function is often hard to see from inside the system. Inside the system, we want to hold it like that person's just lazy. That person just doesn't listen to authority. This boss just doesn't seem to have EQ. But there is some payoff for that. And until the underlying structure changes, until you can get at that and do some work there, the behavior will not truly shift. We can willpower through it. Like we can try to force and do like a daily check-in every single day to try to make things go differently. And that'll work for a while as long as we're all willing to like willpower, but eventually that falls away. I think we have a very simple example after this. After this HBM. Okay, there we go. This is going to take a pot shot at EOS. EOS has a book called Traction, EOS Entrepreneur Operating System. They have a book called Traction and another book called Get a Grip. Get a Grip is a parable. It's about a company that gets turned around through an entrepreneurial operating system. I love EOS's premise, which is there's a point as your company moves from small to medium, your systems start to break down. And without new systems, you are going to be hindered by the systems that brought you here. You are stuck in the old paradigm and you are trying to create something bigger that requires a new paradigm. And until you address that, it's not going to work. You are bound by your existing capacity. They do a lot right. They do some things terribly. And when I say terribly, that's not even really fair. They just don't see what I'm talking about, this layer of leadership at the structural level. The example I always come back to is in the book, there's one person on this team who is chronically late. Friggin' chronically late, Ron. Ron is always late. And in these meetings that these people have in this parable that unfolds, there comes a point where chronically late Ron shows up late to a meeting, and the person leading the meeting, many of you have heard me tell this before, writes Vince Lombardi on the blackboard. And he says, here we honor Vince Lombardi time. And that means if you're not early, you're late. And chronically late Ron is like, whoa, thanks for bringing that to my attention. No one ever talks to me about my lateness. Great. So they had a conversation about it. They addressed it. And then later on in the story, you don't hear any more about that. Later on in the story, chronically late Ron's chronicle lateness was cured forever. What? That's bullshit. That story is it is a example of the perspective that there's a dumb Johnson rod in chronically late Ron's engine. There's just it's for some reason chronically late Ron has a Johnson rod in his engine. You just need to take that out and throw it away. That's the thing. We just needed to mention it, and then he stopped. Now, the deeper truth that this story steps over is there is a reason for chronically late Ron's absence, or sorry, tardiness, and there is a reason that is not being addressed in the structure of the business. There's a reason that the leadership has not addressed this at some level. There is some tension that is held or some balance that is keeping these things together. And until we really get underneath that, the best we can do is just keep saying to chronically late Ron, yo man, Vince Lombardi. And then he shows up late and we're like, dude, Vince Lombardi, do you not remember? Did I not tell you the inspiring story about Vince Lombardi and how if you're not early, you're late? Maybe I'll tell it to you again. And then that has Ron feel bad. And then Ron's going to really make an effort, but he's making an effort over top of a ignorance of what that lateness actually provides, what that lateness allows to happen that wouldn't happen otherwise, what that lateness allows him to not really have to be present to, and so on and so forth. So this is one of those examples where we want to believe that we can just white knuckle through something. The way that sounds for you, if you're this kind of leader, is I know what I need to do. I just need to do it. That's the way that sounds. And the crossing of the threshold is surrendering the idea that if you just need to do it enough, you will start doing it, and realizing there's something I cannot see, that this behavior is getting me. And until I get underneath it and address that inside of my structure, it's not going to shift. It'll shift at best temporarily. So this is why our people often know what to do, but they still don't do it, is because we're not actually addressing the underlying structure. A way to think of this is that behavior is downstream from being. And you can try to address behavior, which is what most PIPs, what most management approaches, what most leadership attempts do, is they try to manage behavior without addressing being, because they're unable to see being, because that's deep work that requires like a real level of embodied expertise that is rare in the world. But until you actually address the being, the behavior can only shift sort of like rearranging the furniture in the apartment. And the cool thing is, once you actually get at being and address that, the behavior doesn't have to be managed anymore, because as you shift the behavior, suddenly whatever that lateness, for example, was providing people stops being necessary. They no longer need that. So for example, I could imagine that chronically late Ron, part of what's going on, I'm going to make up some stuff, but let's imagine that chronically late Ron, part of what's going on for him is he really cares about people, and he wants to like let people know that he cares. And from this place, he has a real hard time saying no to anything, because he has an internal story that saying no to people means that they're going to be left feeling like he doesn't care. And that's really excruciating for Ron, and he can't yet sit in that. And so as a result, chronically late Ron says yes to too many things. Even though he looks at his calendar, even though he remembers the inspiring story about Vince Lombardi, even though he still is like, oh, I know that Vince Lombardi, but this really matters to this person. I'm going to say yes this one more time, and then one more time, and then one more time. And so what happens is that chronically late Ron says yes because the pain of feeling like people are left in this experience that he doesn't care about them is greater than the pain of showing up late to a meeting and having to hear a stupid story about stupid Vince Lombardi one more stupid time. And until we get at that and break that story up, that he has to say yes to everything, otherwise he's uncaring, until that gets broken up, no amount of inspiring story about, I'm sorry, Vince. Yeah, I know you're taking a hit here, but like, even though you said that, that's not really what this work's about. That's growth-based work, not developmental break work. Someone please make Vince Lombardi watch this episode. So anyhow, that's how that all plays out. Okay, I think I've hammered on that story enough. Let's pour some tea here and read what Doug has said. Get my teapot. Here it is. So I want to make sure people know this is real. This is not AI generated tea pouring sound. Listen to a lot of podcasts lately where people, I can tell they're not pouring real tea. I'm like, no, that doesn't have the sound of someone pouring tea directly onto their leg like my podcast does. Doug wrote, "What you just said reminds me of your premise of what is actually important. You grew up thinking money is everything. Well, you optimize all your tools to have all the money, but don't know your children or vice versa. The premise of what you value versus society values or what you consume tells you versus what you really want." Interesting stuff. Yeah. It's interesting because we believe our values are uh, locked. You know, it's like a thing out there. But for the most part, our values are just beliefs that have become entrenched. And in my lineage of work, people often they say, "What are your values?" And where I stand is less about values and more about what is my essential nature. And my essential nature informs the values that I choose. Um, that's an interesting conversation, but a bit of a digression at this point. So I'm not going to go too deep in that. I'm going to talk about. Let's talk about I can't find good people. Oh man, I wish I could find good people for my business. Adam, I just can't find them. They're just not there. This is the same problem as I hate small talk. Ooh, compelling hook. I wonder what Adam's going to say now. This is exciting. That's really, I hadn't thought about that. So both of these are an inability on someone's part to develop something in relationship with people. I don't like small talk is a expression of an underlying belief that there's a right, like there's a better version of conversation to happen, and that on some level, people either are willing to meet you in that or they're not. It's sort of like I'm only interested in finding people that are willing to jump right into the deep end with me right out of the gate. Which I guess I should caveat is fine. There's no, it's not like it's wrong to have that, but if that's your attitude, if that's the belief you're empowering, you're going to find that some parts of life are just unavailable. And that might be fine to you. That's really okay. The distinction I find is powerful here for us is to shift from I hate small talk to I'm unwilling to develop intimacy. That's a much more powerful place to meet a conversation from because it brings the responsibility back inside. And I can't find good people is an expression of I'm not willing to be with people as I develop them. That's often what's happening. So it's often a really common complaint in trades and small businesses right now. And it's worth asking ourselves the question, like, good people, good enough for what? You know, to meet the standard that you hold in your head, to meet the standard that you've never perhaps fully articulated that shifts based on your mood. Where does that standard exist? And what happens when people don't meet it? What I find is that rather than create here's what I'm looking for, you know, like an expression of what you want to create for people, and then meeting people when they fail to hit it and being in the edginess of that conversation that requires an ability on the leader to hold a space for like, hey, you know, I noticed this didn't go the way we had set out. What got in the way? And then be with the defensiveness that brings up from someone and so on and so forth to navigate all of that. That asks something of leaders that most leaders would rather not have to spend time in. And instead, it's much easier to say, this person's just not good people, and I just can't seem to find good people. Just like I hate small talk, it is okay to rest on I can't find good people. But what I notice is the leaders that create exceptional businesses and that create something out in front of the curve and that create something really remarkable are the leaders that are not willing to let themselves off the hook that way. They're unwilling. That's not even really fair as I'm saying this. I'm like, well, that's not fair. It's totally okay to make that choice. It's simply that choice will get you a different set of results than the alternative choice. And the alternative choice is saying, I have not yet figured out how to grow or how to develop good people. Down that path, it's messier. It's actually a much messier path because it requires being with your own discomfort. It requires, first of all, taking a look to see how clear is it what I expect of people and how clear are they in my communication of that? And sometimes if a leader starts to look down this path, they realize, wow, I am walking around with a bunch of expectations, but almost none of it's communicated. I'm just asking the person to like figure out your deadline and let me know. And then I leave it until they don't. And then I get disappointed. And then we don't have a conversation about it. So the first thing is that down the path of I have not yet figured out how to create good people, it actually forces you to confront your own shortcomings rather than to notice and point to theirs. And it also, it's slower, or at least it feels slower in the short term, because you actually have to sit with people in the moment when they haven't achieved the result and then say, well, this didn't go the way you wanted it to and didn't go the way I wanted it to. And like, we got to take a look at that. And that requires a degree of capacity that a lot of people don't have. It requires capacity to sit in the discomfort that you both feel of saying, hey, we had a measure that we were aiming for and we also didn't hit it. And I need to feel like, where was the breakdown for us? Did I not say enough? Can you take a look and see what you didn't do? What happened? And in that tension, what we want to do is we want to collapse the tension. So this person that you're talking to in your team, who you were developing to become a good person, they want to collapse the tension by either saying, I'm so sorry, you're right, I suck. That's fine, but there's no actual learning in that. Or they want to collapse the tension by pointing to everything you did. You didn't do enough, you didn't do enough, you didn't do enough. And then we want to collapse the tension by, okay, great, they gave me the apology, it'll never happen. They've promised me it'll never happen again. Great, we can get out of this awful conversation. Or I'll take responsibility, I'll take responsibility, I'll take responsibility, and then they get off the hook. So this path is it's like messier. It feels slower because you're actually sitting in something with people. But the payoff is that you develop leadership. So that is the payoff. And it's a path down this second path. This path will change you as you lean in. As you walk down this path, you will discover, you will be called to like sit in a degree of capacity that you don't yet have. Down the path of I can't find good people, you are not, there is no need to sit in that capacity, because what happens is people don't do things to the standard you expect. You sort of take a swing, maybe take another swing, they don't respond, you move them on, and then you try to bring someone in. And the game just becomes filter for good enough, filter for good enough, filter for good enough, until eventually you end up with these incredibly high standards that only 1 out of every 100 people meet. You end up with like turnover, or you lower your standards until you just stop caring. You find a way to numb the part of you that wants to create a particular thing, to make excuses for it. And then, okay, there we go. So here's the thing. The leaders who consistently attract and keep good people are not just better at hiring. It's that there's someone worth working for, and there's someone who can develop good people. And more importantly, there's someone who can develop good leadership relationship. It's almost never about finding good people. Yeah, there's a degree of filtering, right? If you have someone who shows up and they start stealing office supplies, you got a problem. But that's like the bottom 10%. The real work is your ability to or your willingness, to the extent that you want to create the kind of results commensurate with this second, messier, more complicated path. It's about being willing to engage in a pursuit of leadership that is going to force you to change, that's going to rearrange and develop your structure internally, as opposed to just help you create more growth, more optimization. Okay, excellent, super cool. I'm just gonna have a little sip of tea, see if there's anything else left outstanding. I think we covered everything. Kind of touch on that. Everyone's in the room where nobody tells them the truth. So I think this is probably well understood, maybe. At least it's intellectually understood, which is the more senior you get in your leadership, the more people around you are actively managing you. That probably sounds weird, because most people think their experience, I think, what I find is that as people rise up higher in leadership, they find they are managing more people. and not just managing a greater quantity, but qualitatively, they feel like they're managing more people. They're watching, they're censoring what they're saying. They're sort of like, what do I need to share that these people need to hear, but also that doesn't scare them, or, that creates appropriateness in terms of our culture, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really valuable to flip this and to consider the higher up you get, the more people are managing you or managing around you or managing themselves around you, which is all kind of the same flavor. And what happens is they filter or they soften or they shape what they say based on what they think you can handle. Leaders understand this intellectually, usually I find, but they don't have a real answer for it. And when I say they don't have a real answer for it, they have a growth-based answer, right? Okay, I need to active listen more. I need to create more of an experience for people that I'm really listening to them. But the trouble is that that's behavioral. That active listening, you can nod your head at perfect cadence and you can go, yes, at the perfect intervals, but that will never change the fact that you're listening through your own anxiety of what I'm saying and what it says about you and what you're going to have to manage and what you need to get out in front of. All of the nodding of your head and active listening is irrelevant when that's what's going on internally. It just becomes like a behavioral mismatch with the underlying way of being. And so that's the sort of solution that leaders in this place, understanding this intellectually and don't really have a real answer for it, don't have a real way to shift it. That's what's happening, is they're trying to create some kind of behavioral solution, but they're not actually able to get underneath this and see, like, who am I being that is creating people around me, managing me? And the real impact of this is that what happens is they end up making decisions from a reality that doesn't actually exist. Another way to put this is they're getting better and better at leading something that isn't what they think that is. Imagine if you were getting better and better and better at using the right tools for the wrong task. No amount of that is really going to get you there. You get better and better and better at using a hammer to put a screw into the wall, but it's never really going to cross the threshold of being able to use a screw for what a screw is used for. I was talking to some friends and one of them was sharing about using AI to kind of manage some of the like more tedious aspects of what they had to do for a task they were working on. And it's an interesting thing because one of the things I can see happening with AI is, like, we all have these parts of our job that we probably phone in or don't feel that alive to. And so it's like, I don't like doing this. I'm not that alive to it. So let's turn AI towards that and I'll get AI to take care of that task. And now, at least in the short term, it feels like, oh, sweet, I've cleared out something that's soul sucking and I don't like. What you have done is you have moved off of your plate something that you currently have an experience of tediousness towards. The bad news is you have not changed underneath it the part of you that is relating to that task as tedious and can't create a different experience with that task. And so it's a little bit like when you there's this sort of understood phenomenon in highways where expanding a highway to have more lanes does not decrease traffic. It does for like the month after you do that. But what happens is then, because the highway has more lanes, it seems like it's got more space. So more people start to take the highway and then boom, you're back to the same problem. This is what using AI to optimize for tasks like this, to move them off the plate, because you haven't shifted the underlying way you were showing up that was creating that experience, there's just going to be more tasks that come in to which you have to put more AI to shift more off the plate. It doesn't actually change anything fundamental. And so this is an example of solving for the wrong problem. The problem is not that you just seem to get stuck with some degree of tedious tasks. The problem is that you have a way of relating or showing up to this task, or there's a conversation you're not having with someone that would shift your experience of it. And this is another example where, see, AI, the solution it presents, is so good, but it's the solution to the wrong problem. And as we get, you can never get enough of what you don't really need. In fact, the more you get of what you don't actually need, the more you end up with it. And so there's a real risk, I think, here that AI will have people, I'm optimizing, I'm shifting, but it's just going to be an amplifier and it's not actually going to change that underlying experience. If there is something like a task that we're taking on that feels tedious and dumb and a waste of time, it's really worth looking at, who am I being about this? Is there a conversation I'm avoiding? What am I not having to do by virtue of just clearing this off my plate? Valuable things to explore. And this is the same case for leaders, right? Like the leaders that are getting better at figuring out how to show up from the reality they perceive from people managing them are missing the mark. It's all very earnest. And you may be able to feel this where you're just like, geez, I'm responding to the feedback. I'm responding to this is because you don't have people in your lives that can really stand for you powerfully and reveal the reality that you can't see. You have people in your lives that care about you. You have people in your lives that share your context. You know, that's what stuff like EO provides. It provides a place where you can be with other people with the same problems. That is important in healing, but that is different than someone that's like getting into a river with a bunch of people in the same current as you. They're not really going to be able to point out your current, but it's helpful because at least you can all be like, that person's going right there. And, you know, I can see that. And I agree with you on that. But it's not the same. It's not the same as someone who's outside of the river who can actually point to something distinct. So that's our current state of leadership for today. Let's see. What do I want to offer you as inquiries to sit in? A couple inquiries to sit in, I think, would be one, where might you be solving for the wrong problem? And what might the wrong problem be? I think that's a really powerful place to look. And that's a question that's just kind of a nice inquiry to sit with. Usually really powerful ways to kind of allow that to exist for you are to look at where there's a perennial complaint or a frustration or that sense of tediousness. There's often a conversation we're not having. There's often something, anywhere we're tolerating things in life, that's usually a place where there's an underlying conversation or some kink in our relationships that we're not actually addressing. And those are usually the richest places to practice. Okay, we're going to finish with a little plug, as we like to do on these shows. The intensive is coming up. We've got early bird pricing up until May 1st. That's May 1st. So the intensive it's the sort of container that I'm describing here. The structure of the room is a room filled with leaders who are at a threshold. The threshold is what we've been talking about today. They're at a threshold where the tools that brought them here, the strategies, the ability to optimize, the growth, the high performance that's allowed them to excel has diminishing returns. Second, they're aware that it's having diminishing returns. And third, there's something they're called into beyond this point. It's not enough to be like, I notice that things aren't working as well as they could be. I'd like to do that better, or I'd like to shift that. That's not sufficient. You actually have to be called into something beyond that point. Until there's something over here that you're willing to put yourself on the line to create, noticing diminishing returns is insufficient, because it just becomes an interesting intellectual exercise. Oh, I notice I'm not blah, 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 blah. Wouldn't it be cool to change? We have to be willing to put something on the line. So it's a room for leaders at that threshold and clear that there's something they want to make happen in their lives for which they are willing to be changed. And they're clear it's going to cost them something, and they're yes to that. And what happens in that room is we create that shift. We move your perspective and consciousness below the surface of this growth edge across a threshold to the developmental edge. And what happens is you leave being able to see the thing you've probably been tripping over for most of your leadership. Not badly, but just like, whoa, snap, suddenly I can see this. And we begin to support you to put that into practice so you can create something new. So May 22nd through 29th here in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. It's $1,500 up until May 1st, and then early bird pricing turns over, and then it's $2,000 to come and join us. It's an experience that's going to change your life. It's going to be amazing. I'm super stoked. We've got some amazing people in the room. That's everything we got for you this week. I hope you enjoyed the stream. As always, if you've got feedback, if there's particular topics you'd love to see riffed on or expanded, if you have guests that you think would be really juicy, I love to hear from that. So have a great weekend. We'll catch you guys soon. Bye-bye.